Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this show, we're going to kind of do a round robin from Tower Hamlets to Hartlepool and then back again. So first section, we're going to talk about the referendum campaign. I know like there's all these videos, denials and testimonies of people backing certain campaigns. Andrew and I are going to talk about the campaign. And then after the break, we're going to talk about what happens after the referendum, the possible scenarios, and what are the next steps. And then after that, we're going to talk about Hartlepool and also what's happening in the rest of the country with national politics and possible impacts in terms of Tower Hamlets and London as well, the long-term trends. And then after that, we're going to talk about Section 106. So Section 106 is all the money that the council gets from developers to spend on things. Andrew and I are going to discuss how much do we have, and where is it going to be spent. So join us. We're going to go straight to a break, and after the break, we're going to go straight into the discussion about the referendum campaign in Tower Hamlets. So we're going to go straight to a break. Thank you. Cool.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, yeah, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio. Relax Radio.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So first section, we're going to talk about the Tower Hamlets referendum campaign. It's been quite a colourful campaign, Andrew. There's been a lot of fun. We've had a centenarian, I don't know what they call it, after octogenarian, is it centenarian, or someone who's over 100 years old? He was dragged into this. There was sort of like, does he support the mayoralty, does he not? And then a video came out, and also there's been issues about what's been happening outside the polling stations as well, on a serious note. But yeah, it was quite a colourful campaign. It put Tower Hamlets back on the map. Andrew, what's your take on this campaign? I know you kind of like put a video out just before the referendum, and it got everybody discussing what's Andrew saying? What does it actually mean? But what's your take on the campaign?
So it was a very interesting campaign, because the liveliest part of the campaign, well, of all of the elections, was actually the referendum on whether to keep the mayor or go back to the leader system. And it generated a lot of passion and enthusiasm on social media especially, but also on the streets yesterday. So it did seem to be the topic that most people are interested in, rather than what's happening in terms of the mayoral election, whether it's going to be Sadiq Khan or Sean Bailey. I think maybe because people assumed that Sadiq Khan was going to win it by a landslide, even though that looks less likely today. But it was very passionate and some quite profound issues. And I think my concern, which is why I did the video, is that actually we don't know enough about how the leader system will work. And I keep catching people saying cabinet system or leader in cabinet. But if you remember what was on the ballot paper, it actually said leader system. It didn't use the words cabinet. And I think that's quite telling in terms of how the campaign worked. Whoever the leader is may well have a really strong and vibrant and powerful cabinet, but as I understand it, it's going to be up to the leader to decide that. It's not actually baked into the system itself.
Yeah, it's what I found kind of interesting is it brought up a lot of issues that have been bubbling away. So that was channeled into the systems kind of ish. and there's a very strong anti-incumbency kind of feeling. Like Labour has a monopoly of power, and we need a system to keep that in check, or actually change them. So that was just having conversations with people. That was actually driving the campaign to keep the mayoral system. So there is an assumption that they will look for Rahman supporters, but I actually came across sort of like a wide variety of people who are not look for Rahman supporters, who from all backgrounds, all demographics, who basically saw the mayoral system as kind of like a reset button that people can press if things go too far, because given the way our electoral system is, it's the entire hamlets. We literally have a one-party state. What's your thinking on that? Do you have similar conversations with people who just talking to you about it?
Yeah, so interesting. There was actually a former UKIP person who's very passionate about UKIP a few years ago, and she was very passionate about keeping the mayoral system. I sort of saw her on social media. So, it wasn't just Lutfur Rahman. There were other people as well, but also a lot of people, were concerned. And I think part of the problem is that, we weren't looking at this decision in isolation. It was also thinking about, does this mean that Lutfur Rahman can return? And obviously for some people, newer people who've arrived in Tower Hamlets more recently, it's like, well, who is he? We've never heard of this person before. So that added complexity as well. And I think that was the problem with it. I mean, I was actually concerned last year that if we were to have this referendum, it would be about John Biggs, and actually it turned out to be about Lutfur Rahman as a personality. Yeah. And I, in the end, voted based on principles.
Gotcha. I think the other thing is it's the imagery as well, the perception as well. The other thing that people that I got when I was sort of like walking down the ward, so everybody knew that I kind of like kept silence, kind of ish. I took an oath of silence, omerta, on this issue. But so it was interesting that all sides could have frank discussions with me. But one of the things that came out was sort of like the unfairness of it. So again, what's happened is that the whole thing got wrapped up into the previous mayor. So so it's sort of like it's a basic thing in campaigning. So what happened was my Labour colleagues, all leading together, basically defined the campaign as Stop Lutfur Rahman kind of ish, which so they amplified the previous mayor. And then when it comes to the optics, you had everybody on one side and you had this lonely former solicitor on the other, local lad, doesn't wear a tie, walks around, taking on everyone, like it just seems like, why are they beating up on this guy, and that's what it generated, that kind of sympathy. And it's interesting, I got this like text message from someone the night before, and he's completely non-political. He's a qualified lawyer, etc. And it was just like, this is so unfair. We need to stop it. So it's completely so like it just shows that you could run a campaign, but it's interpreted by the electorate in a different way, and it has its own kind of story to it. What's your take on this kind of video gates of people supporting, or people's posters kind of ish? I personally, I found it quite hilarious. And what was your take when sort of like did they or did they not consent to their pictures? And then obviously you had people condemning the use of their pictures. Letters are being written to the chief executive, and then a video comes out. It just seems like a sketch from a movie.
So there's a dedicated police team called the Special Elections Team in London, who basically focus on elections. And traditionally, Tower Hamlet generates, each sort of set of elections, roughly 2/3 of their work. So 30 London boroughs, but only one of them generates most of their workload. And I'm aware of at least 2, if not more, complaints that have gone into the police as well. So that will also be very interesting to kind of see what happens from that. So again, it's it's classic Tower Hamlets. But the other interesting thing about this campaign and referendum is actually how well organised the sort of the, what you call them, the old Aspire or Tower Hamlets First or Look for Rahman party was. You know, they put out high quality leaflets. You know, they did their videos as well. So for an organisation that has, you know, well, one councillor and no other real backup, you know, in terms of the manpower that they put onto the streets, it was quite impressive. So it actually does show that, you know, if the mayoral system wins, that actually, you know, this could, you know, be a good testing ground for the mayoral elections in May 2022. And it is plausible that Lutfur Rahman could get re-elected. That's not my preference, but my view is that you should beat him at the ballot box rather than trying to rig the system from stopping him from running.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. One of the things you were talking about, how well organized people outside mainstream parties are, and I think the reason is that the technology has basically is much easier now. You can buy off the shelf tools, technological tools that allow, say, someone in a bedroom to run an similar operation to a national party. A good example is the Northern Independence Party, which came out of a Twitter account, and I don't know how much they polled at the end, but I didn't check that out, to be honest. But in the opinion polls, they were getting about 6% sort of ish, and that's totally on social media presence sort of ish. So it just shows the sort of like the barrier of entry of entering politics is becoming lower and lower sort of ish, and it's much easier to organize. And I think the other thing is there's a general trend of in politics to move away from mainstream parties, and that's what the mayoral system allows, is for people to have an alternative to the mainstream parties. And not just in Tower Hamlets, you've had areas outside of Tower Hamlets where you've had independent mayors, but also throughout the world where you might have independent mayors, or you might have individuals who are considered mavericks in their parties becoming mayors. So I think there is these kind of general trends which allow players outside the mainstream political parties to punch above their weight. Any final thoughts? What's your take on the videos of people hassling people outside the polling booths, which I found quite bizarre, kind of after all the issues that we've had in Tower Hamlets, and having the boxes, kind of, it's a traffic box. People still just don't take the lessons.
Yeah. No, well, I think it does mean that next May that we'll have police outside each polling station again, because I only saw one police officer yesterday at one polling station. And I think that, you know, the rules are still not clear enough. And I shared on Twitter, on social media, what the rules are for tellers, but we don't actually have traditional tellers where people ask how you voted when you left. And I think, you know, activity on election day can be okay as long as it's kind of done without getting in people's faces, and if you're just giving them information, you're just, you know, standing there if they want to ask you questions, and it can be fun, and I think it's not necessarily inappropriate, but some of what I heard at what happened yesterday definitely was inappropriate. And again, I know reports are being made to the police as well, and that's not acceptable. And I know people, and also we had really long queues in some polling stations. So at Seven Mills School, I know people who didn't vote because every time they went, they just saw this massively long queue. So that would have had an impact on turnout as well. So
turnout was really strange. I've heard, like, in Wapping, turnout was near 50% apparently, whereas in other places it was hitting 20 or below 20. So again, turnout would be interesting just to see that breakdown of turnout, and again, that might have an impact on the result. We don't know. So I think until we get the figures from all the polling stations. So that's something that I'll be watching to see what the turnouts were in each of the polling stations. We're going to go straight to a break. After the break, we're going to discuss what happens after the referendum possible scenarios, possible results, possible scenarios. So Andrew and I are going to discuss it. So join us after the break. So we're going to go straight to a break. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to discuss what happens next, what happens after the referendum. We're going to have the result one way or another on Saturday. Is it yes for mayor or no, or number two or no for leading cabinet? So what happens next? So Andrew, do you want to talk through? Are you going to be there at the count just out of interest? So do you want to just talk through what the timetable and what happens in the weekend, and then what do you think is going to happen straight after that, so to speak?
Yeah, so the count begins tomorrow morning at the Excel Centre from about 7:30 onwards in the morning. So what they'll basically be doing is sort of emptying all of the sort of the ballot boxes from each of the polling stations, making sure that none of the ballot papers went into the wrong box, which is why everything has to be counted on the same day. But my understanding is that separate teams will do the Mayor of London votes, a separate team will do the mayoral referendum, and then a separate team will do the Isle of Dogs neighbourhood planning referendum, which is what I'm there to observe. But I might be able to sort of go over and have a look at the other one. So in terms of timing, we just don't know. It might be really quick because it's very simple. Basically it's a yes or no. So it's not like really complicated like the London mayoral one is going to be with, if you remember seeing your ballot paper, lots and lots of different boxes. So the count actually may be very quick tomorrow. And I'll tweet about the results as soon as we hear them. But I think once we know the results, I think everybody's going to have a deep think about what we do for the next year. If the mayoral system wins, I suspect there may be a lot of interest within Tower Hamlets Council about making sure the mayor doesn't have too much power. So we may have a big rewrite of the constitution and sort of change practices. I mean, the mayor can overturn some of that, because the mayor, that's the whole point, the mayor has lots of power. But it's harder to overturn established practice in the constitution than if there is nothing in place. Whereas if the leader system wins, there's still a lot of unresolved detail about how the leader actually works. As I understand it, they're elected for a 4-year term. But then how do cabinet members get appointed? My understanding is that the leader picks the cabinet members and then decides whether they have a vote or not. And that's something, again, we may want to try and influence to make sure that cabinet members have the right to vote in the leader system. So again, there'll be a lot of work within the council on things like the constitution and how decisions are made by the cabinet, depending on which side wins tomorrow.
But in terms of changing the constitution, we could only change it at the AGM, or would we have to call an extraordinary meeting at the council to change it? That's my understanding, that when it comes to constitutions, it's only at the AGM you could table a change to a constitution. Have you thought about the mechanisms of that, or have you?
I thought we could change it because I know that we're making other, minor incremental changes, so tightening up the wording and other areas. So I thought we could do this at ordinary council meetings, but I'm not sure. And again, this is part of the problem is, as we've said before, this has been so rushed is a lot of the facts and how this worked was still not very clear. What we do know is council officers have already been thinking about some of these issues. So they're also getting ready for this as well, depending on which side wins. This is if the leader system wins. I don't know if they're thinking about what happens if the mayoral system wins. But yeah, there'll have to be a lot of sort of thought about how it works, and we'll have to do some research about how does the leader system work elsewhere, or how can you, whether it's legally possible or not, I don't know, to constrain a mayor before they're even elected. So.
Well, yeah, it'd be interesting to actually do that. You've been reading, just say on the weekend the mayoral system does win. Obviously, the discussion is going to be as to how can we have proper checks and balances to make sure that we don't have the issues that we've had in the past. Yeah. You've been reading all the commissioner reports, say in Liverpool. Croydon was a different system, but again, Croydon can happen. Have you had any thoughts and ideas as to what kind of extra checks and balances that we can have on an executive mayoral model?
So there are a couple of examples. So one area we know is that Overview and Scrutiny Committee routinely complain about we just don't have enough officer resource, and that's not me saying that. There's actually other Labour councillors who are kind of saying that. And we've only got one or two officers kind of dedicated. So one of the arguments might be is you might want to beef up the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and appoint some extra officers and put them in next year's budget. So that's a really well-funded kind of organisation that has lots of officer support. That doesn't mean that a future mayor couldn't, kick those people out or fire them or make that job really difficult and remove the officers that way. But if it would force the mayor to do that, and that would be a clear warning sign that if a mayor did that, then they're not interested in scrutiny and transparency. So that would kind of help. And there are some other areas. So, for example, Mayor John Biggs a few months ago said that cabinet members have the right to vote. Obviously, he needs to continue that, and we kind of need to make that an established practice. So again, if a new mayor comes in, it's like, well, this is what the previous mayor did. Of course, you're going to continue this. And if you don't, then it's a very clear signal that actually you're not intending to run the mayoral system. And we could do this as part of the election campaign. So what we could do in the election campaign is come up with some basic principles. For example, that cabinet members have the right to vote, and get the candidates for mayor to actually commit to those principles in public before the election. And if they don't do that, then again, that's a signal for voters. And if they decide to break their promise, well, then they have to break their promise. But at least they've made that commitment in advance. So those are kind of some of the things that I'm thinking about, or that we need to think about collectively, both councillors, but also residents of Tower Hamlets as well. Because I'm clear, I actually did vote to keep the mayoral system. But, I did sort of say its main problem is that, one person has too much power, and they can use that for good or they can use that for bad.
I think the other power that a lot of people don't realize the executive mayor has is the power of patronage. And so I just want to explain what that means. Is there's all these bodies out there in Tower Hamlets. I didn't even know some of them existed, where the mayor just appoints people onto these boards. And some of them actually make quite important decisions when you actually look at them. On some of them on a very strategic level. I think the Olympic Legacy Board, I don't know what they're called. That makes really important decisions, or used to make decisions, but has oversight to say even the Whitechapel Gallery, which is a strategic anchor, and then the housing association. So each of the local housing associations, the Tower Hamlets Council has the right to send someone there. They're all concentrated in the hands of a single individual, and there's no transparency. There's no transparency as to who gets appointed, what's the reasoning behind those appointments, and there's no way of actually challenging or checking up on these appointments, saying, look, do these guys turn up to the meetings? What do they actually agree on? What they're agreeing on? Are they in line with, say, the strategic agenda of the council? It's really weird. I did detect a pattern where just one certain individual was in all the arts appointments. That's the only pattern I could detect. I'll let the listeners sort of like decide what that means. But what's your views on that? How can we, in terms of appointments, have you had any ideas about that, or any good practices that are out there in terms of these kind of things?
So generally speaking, the people who get these are all from the Labour Party, so I have no experience of some of these other committees. They'll have to say Councillor Peter Golds, I think, is on the Armed Forces Committee, so it's not completely clean sweep. But the other power of patronage is to give councillors jobs with money attached as well. And that's something else. You know, there are roughly about 30 councillors who get extra money. And from memory, I might have got this slightly wrong, about 15 of them, it's in the power of the mayor to give those people jobs, and the other 15 are kind of they're selected by their fellow councillors. So the chair of the Opening Scrutiny Committee is normally sort of done by other councillors. Same with audit in principle as well. You know, and there's a lot of money that goes with some of those jobs, you know, potentially up to £30,000 if you're a deputy mayor, on top of your councillor allowance of £10,000. So that's £40,000 in total. And it's a lot of money. And it's the same thing that, you know, government give money to ministers as well. And that's another very important power of patronage. And there's not much we can do about that, but what we might want to do is kind of reduce the number of people who get extra money, which I know is maybe something that's not universally popular among fellow councillors. But again, if you reduce the number of people, number of paid jobs, again, that would force a new mayor to then have to change that, which will be more difficult than if you're inheriting something where lots of people are getting a fair amount of money.
It's kind of interesting when you talked about the SRAs. I actually bumped into yesterday the former deputy mayor, deputy leader of Tower Hamlets Council, Councillor Abdul Shakur, who was, and he basically talked about in his time where they didn't get an SRA and they found it difficult, and then he went to Norway to look at there, and then they brought the idea of the allowances. And it seems like the discussions come back a full circle now, where people are saying, hang on a minute, there's too much money swimming around. We need to go back to some kind of balance. But it's kind of interesting, the full circle. We're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to discuss what's happening nationally. So we've had a sort of like a real focus on Tower Hamlets, the colourful politics in Tower Hamlets, but we're going to look at nationally. There's some interesting things happening. Probably it's a time for Andrew to gloat, kind of ish, as to vindication of a certain political direction, but you know, but there's different interpretations. So we're going to look at Hartlepool, but we're just generally going to look at what's happening in throughout the country, especially where you've got all these local government elections and the trends as well, and try to explain and see what the impacts are going to be in London and in Tower Hamlets from those little break. After the break, we're going to go to Hartlepool and the local elections. Break.
Landlords, enough is enough. It's about time. Unite and fight for your rights. Join NLA. That's Newham Landlords Association.co.uk. Have your say only with NLA. www.newhamlandlordsassociation.co.uk.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, after the break, we're going to talk about Hartlepool, the local elections, and what they mean. So I'm going to go over to Andrew. Andrew, tell us what you make of the elections. I know I've been receiving phone calls, so I'm just going to make a certain caveat. I looked at the polls. I knew that those of us in the know knew that things weren't going to be that good, but surprisingly, I've been getting a lot of calls from Labour Party members, kind of ish, like, what does this mean, you know? But Andrew, I'll let you kick off, sort of ish.
Yeah, so I woke up earlier this morning because I guess I was curious about what was happening with Hartlepool, because we expected the result about 4 o'clock. So stupidly, I woke up early expecting to see it, but it got delayed. But when it did come out, it was a shocker. So, you know, Conservatives got 52% of the vote, or 15,000 votes, and Labour only got 29% of the vote and 8,000 votes. So, it wasn't even close. And I know there's been lots of discussions about the technicalities and about candidate selection, all the rest of it, but none of that would have made any difference. And then sort of in the Tees Valley mayoral election, Ben Houchen got 73% of the vote. And Tees Valley again is sort of red wall, sort of Labour. And just looking at the council election, so this is only after 61 of 143 councils have been declared. So it's not full picture yet, but Labour lost 164 councillors, Conservatives gained 155. And what's very interesting is actually the Green Party gained 30 councillors. So the Labour vote was going Conservative, maybe some Liberal Democrat, and some Green. And, that's also going to be very interesting. And I think, there's lots of arguments about it's the leader, but I think this is much more fundamental than that. I think this is a complete change in how we view politics and how people vote. And if you look at other European countries, the sort of centre-left party, with one or two exceptions, have done really badly over the last 10, 20 years. So I think this is systemic. And this does raise quite profound challenges for, the Labour Party. What is it for? Who is it for? Is Labour even the right name for the party? Because, who Labour are appealing to is currently not a big enough electoral coalition to win, especially if Labour have lost Scotland. And that kind of, I think the Conservatives have done a better job of kind of moving with that change in the electoral coalition, which is why they've been so successful in the red wall. And the question is whether Labour will follow and how will they follow. But, I think this has been on the cards.
Yeah.
It's just getting worse and worse.
No, I think there's long-term trends. So I'm just going to put my disclosure in. So I was the general election agent in 2017 for Momentum. And if you do a Google search, you could find the story there. But one of the things is that we did put the campaign together, and it was a successful campaign. And the issue is you have to put an electoral coalition together. So every election, a political party will look at the base. So you have what they call your universe, your electoral universe. That's the terminology. And you have what you call your base. And then you have your target, to your winning target. So you've got to make the differences. So you've got to look in the electorate and see, where do I get the different bunch of voters to actually get that winning target. So every election you have that discussion, but there are interesting long-term trends which make it harder for Labour in certain areas, but easier for Labour in other areas. And the only analogy I could think of is what happened in American politics with the Democrat Party, where most of the votes were in the South, and the Republicans were in the north of the country. And then in the 60s, that slowly inversed. So by the 80s, and even now, all the votes from the Republicans are from the south of the country, where the Democrats are in former Republican areas in the north. So that's the way I see it. That's the kind of like long-term trends where I see like the north is going to eventually become like the American South, and the south of England is going to be like the American North. It's much more prosperous. It's much more urbanized. You got university graduates, a higher proportion of university graduates than you would have in those northern towns. A lot of the reason is that a lot of the graduates in those northern towns, there are no jobs, so they move down to London and the southeast as well. So the demographics in those towns are much more elderly. Whereas in London, like for example, Tower Hamlets, majority of our population is under the age of 40, I think, or 45.
It's 34.
So so you have that kind of trends, so to speak. But I do think that if you look below the surface, there are some interesting trends for a Labour or a left-wing party. One of the stats I've been looking at, and I was looking at the US, and I'm going to do comparisons in the UK, is traditionally what happened was like the urban centers were poor and the suburbs were kind of like much more rich or affluent. What's happened is poverty has increased over the last 10 years in the suburb areas, and you see that in terms of what's happened in Redbridge, for example, which wasn't a Labour council traditionally, which was seen as an affluent area, but it now has like really high child poverty rates in certain parts. And you've seen that trend all over London, but throughout what would be termed the commuter towns and suburbia, that there is an increase in poverty sort of ish in those areas, which make an inroad, which will allow sort of like a left-leaning political offer to basically make inroads. A lot of people are renting as well because of the high cost of housing in the southeast of England. So where people rent, they tend to be much more left wing. Where people own their own houses, they tend to be much more right wing in terms of their political thinking. So there are interesting trends, but the issue is it's up for each political party to basically exploit those kind of trends. It just seems Boris Johnson is a much better electoral campaigner than any of the Labour guys. He took on Ken Livingstone and beat him twice, and he took on Corbyn, which Theresa May found very difficult to handle. He wasn't your traditional political opponent. And he took him on and he won, and now he's parking the tanks on Labour's lawn, so to speak. So Boris Johnson is a formidable campaigner, and he's attracting people like Ben Houchen and others to basically come in to the is it Andy Streeting as well in Birmingham as well?
Yeah.
Who's they have who've done out of the box kind of really popular policies. So I think that we're in the age of populism, and I think the Conservative Party, in terms of its structures, allows those kind of mavericks to come through. That's how I see it from the outside. It could be different, Andrew, from your experience.
No, I think, because the Conservative Party has kind of always been less ideological and more interested in power, is that they're more able to change quickly if the situation or the electoral maths require it. So they're now doing things which are not traditionally conservative because it works. So Ben Houchen is a good example. He's doing things that you would have thought a Labour mayor would be doing, like nationalising the airport. And I think, part of the problem for Labour is I think it's more sort of fixed in ideology. And I think in reality, as you was just saying, and I think the American analogy is a good one, is a Labour Party basically needs to dominate the south of England. Problem with that is that, it's going to have to compete with the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, because the only Green MP is in Brighton. So, Labour Party needs to dominate southern England, because it looks likely that, they will continue to lose up north, but, they'll retain Liverpool and some of the other big urban centres. So it's not going to be a complete loss, and parts of Manchester. But, the risk is, and it's also a risk for the Conservatives as well, is that they will lose seats in the southeast as people move away from London and start to swing the electorate. So it's almost like a race going on, Conservatives gaining in the north, Labour gaining in the south, as to who gets where. But I think realistically, I think at the next general election, I think it's more likely than not that the Conservatives will get re-elected unless they make a complete and utter hash of things, which is entirely possible. They're not the most competent of party at times, or if there's a major financial recession or depression, then I think everything is up in the air again. But if those two things don't happen, and the other thing we haven't mentioned is the boundary review will happen before the next general election, and that will give a small advantage to the Conservatives. It means more Labour seats in London, but I think nationally it gives them a small advantage. So I think on balance, things don't look good for Labour. But I've always believed is we need a fundamental realignment of UK politics, because I didn't think the two main political parties worked really well. And the only question, which was going to get smashed first, the Conservatives or Labour. And it now looks like Labour are the ones who are suffering the most. And therefore that should force on them the most radical change in response.
Yeah. I think we're going to have dominate. Well, speaking to colleagues, in the know, I think we're going to have domination of the national politics by the Conservative Party. They're going to set the agenda, which makes it much more interesting for us in local government, in opposition for us to focus in local government, to showcase certain ideas, sort of ish, in local government, to say this is what we can do in national government. And I have seen sort of like a much more of a focus amongst Labour activists and sort of like thinkers within the movement to start thinking about local government. People are highlighting the Preston model or the Cleveland model, so like community wealth. What do you do if manufacturing leaves an area? How do you basically generate wealth, etc.? So those kind of discussions are happening. I know Matthew Brown is releasing his book next week, I think, on the Preston model. It's coming out on the 11th of May. I know I have to do a review on it. That's why. So the discussion, I think, is going to be much more on local government. And it's interesting to see whether that has an impact in terms of Tower Hamlets or London politics with the coming local elections coming up, and see what radical alternatives, because we do have to, as a political party, you have to make an attractive offer to the electorate. And if the electorate is rejecting the current offer, you need to go back and come up with something better. Do you see it sort of like a fundamental shift in the Conservative Party with this new economic populism kind of ish, Andrew? Are we going to see this in Tower Hamlets as well? Are you guys going to be big spenders in Tower Hamlets? Are you going to nationalise Canary Wharf, for example? That's going to be quite popular.
I'm not a Conservative anymore, so I can't really speak about what they might do. But there's actually an argument that the best thing that Tower Hamlets Labour could do to help Labour nationally is do such a good job in Tower Hamlets that, when people do leave this area, because we have lots of young people come to this area and then they generally move away, when they've got families to suburban areas, is they go into those suburban areas of saying, oh, Labour were really great in Tower Hamlets, and therefore I'll vote for Labour in my new area. And that's how you turn, safe Conservative seats in the southeast into Labour seats. But that means that Tower Hamlets Labour have to up their game and sort of really deliver, which ironically might encourage people to stay, whereas actually what you want them to do is to leave as Labour voters to go elsewhere. So,
yeah, well, let's see what the impact is going to be. It'd be interesting to see whether Tower Hamlets Labour, including myself as part of it, come up with a much more of a radical offer, and see what the counter offer is from the opposition in Tower Hamlets in light of what's happening in national politics, and see what happens. So we're going to go straight to another break. After the break, we're going to discuss Section 106. Section 106 money in Tower Hamlets. How much is there? Where is it? And where does it get spent? So Andrew and I are going to have a discussion, because everybody keeps on asking, oh, you got 500 million pounds or something like that in some bank account somewhere. So we're going to just explain about the Section 106. So join us after the break. After the break, we're going to go talk about Section 106 in Tower Hamlets. Break.
I'm Bashir Chaudhry, owner of All Seasons Letting, visiting Relax Radio. I'm very optimistic and very impressed that this radio station is going to be very useful for our community. Please download the app and keep listening.
Relax. Why read when you can listen? Relax Radio.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about the Section 106. How much is it? Where is it? And where does it get spent? So Andrew, I'm going to pass it over to you. If you could just describe to our viewers and listeners what is Section 106 and answer those three basic questions, which...
Okay, so I just lost you there, Puru, but
in terms of politics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are three main sources of money that Tower Hamlets Council gets. So one of them is called Section 106. So when a developer builds a new building, they come to some agreement with Tower Hamlets Council that they will pay the council some money for new infrastructure or whatever that they agree with the council. So, for example, Section 106 money has also been used, for job training, for green initiatives, air quality improvements, transport for London improvements, as well as more widely. We've also then got something called Community Infrastructure Levy, which was the replacement for Section 106. So from anything approved post-April 2015 would have paid Community Infrastructure Levy, and that's not a negotiated number like Section 106. It's a mathematical formula. For every square metre that you build, you have to pay the council £280 per square metre. So that that adds up to a lot of money. So if Asda gets redeveloped on the Isle of Dogs, potentially that could be £50 million of community infrastructure levy. So it really adds up. And then the third is new homes bonus. To give you some idea of the scale, and unfortunately these numbers are a little bit old, but we had a major fire in Blackwall today that you may have seen on the news, and that's been a bit of a distraction, so I haven't got updated numbers. To give you some idea, back in 2018, at that point we had 110 million pounds of Section 106, and I know that number has gone up. We had at that point 44 million pounds of Community Infrastructure Levy, or SIL for short, and I think that number is nearer 60 million. And at that point, we had 26 million pounds of new homes bonus, and that number is about 30 million pounds. So in total, today we've probably got about 200 million pounds sat in various bank accounts. And one of our problems is that we, with the exception of last year, is the value of that money erodes because of inflation. So traditionally, inflation has been around 2%, but our bank interest is only about 1%. So each year we lose about 1% of the value of our reserves. So if you add up all the reserves from everything, it adds up to about 500 million pounds. And in a sort of average year, we can lose 2.4 million pounds. And there was one 3-year period where the council's finance team estimated would lose, I think, 22 million pounds over 3 years through inflation. So not spending this money because it's sat in a bank account means that we sort of lose out. And the reason why we put this on the agenda is actually a journalist was approaching me yesterday, sort of asking about Community Infrastructure Levy and how it's spent, because 25 of it should be spent on something called local infrastructure, or I think it's called the neighbourhood plot. And Mayor John Biggs have said that 25 should be spent on local projects. Not much of that money has been spent, but 25 million pounds, sorry, 25% of 60 million pounds, that's 15 million pounds. It's a lot of money. And the question the journalist was asking was, how can we spend the money to best effect to help the wider community? And the council do these consultations, but and they do a good job in the consultations. But when you look at the outcome of it, it doesn't really add up in terms of what I would think is value for money, or what I think would actually benefit the community. So it's one of the things, and I say this to council officers as well. A lot of council officers don't seem to be aware that actually there is a lot of money sat in the bank account, and a lot that and some of this money can be spent on quite a wide range of different things. Section 106, if you want to change what you spend it on, you have to ask the developer, but the developer pretty much nearly always says yes. They're quite happy to repurpose it. So, for example, New Providence Wharf, where we had the fire today, they paid, I think, about £5 million of Section 106. I don't think it's all been spent, but some of that Section 106 money was spent on the cable on the mural in Cable Street, commemorating the 1930s battle with fascism, and so yes, and there's really interesting ways that you can spend Section 106 money if you think about it, and I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of talk about over the coming months is how we can spend Section 106. But especially SIL, because as I said, 25% of that money is meant to be spent locally on local projects.
I think we need to have a strategic discussion as well, how we do investments in Tower Hamlets. So I've been looking at how cities, so before I came onto the program at lunchtime, I looked at how other cities throughout the world have been looking at how they could use investment by the local authority to kickstart like a virtuous cycle. So you got like innovative cities like Cleveland in America, or Albuquerque, Austin. They're part of the community wealth building agenda, the Democracy Collaborative, which came out of Cleveland. I think they put this together. So it's literally like you got a limited pot of money. You got to, if you don't use it strategically, then it's wasted. So they sort of like channeling the investment. We haven't had those kind of discussions in Tower Hamlets. It just seems to be kind of like willy-nilly, kind of who shouts the loudest gets it. Let's extend the pavement here. Or if you've got an articulate councillor on a ward, then they could get the money spent on what the councillor wants to get spent on, but not necessarily what's needed for the area. So a good example is Bartlett Park, which neighbours my ward. There's money being spent, but there wasn't any discussion. Eliminated a lot of issues, but it could have gone the other way. And it's willy-nilly. Just one individual was very articulate and got the money spent in a specific way. But there isn't that kind of strategic thinking as to how do we kickstart economy or regenerate certain areas in our borough that are dilapidated or dying, sort of ish. There isn't that kind of discussion. Andrew, what's your thoughts? Has anyone in the council come up with that kind of thinking, or yourselves?
No. So I mean, I'll give you another example. So it is in our financial interest as residents of Tower Hamlets and as councillors that as many people as possible keep on working in the offices in Canary Wharf, because if those offices stay empty, it would have a catastrophic financial impact on us. So one of the things that we need to do is to encourage as many people to commute in from Kent and Essex into Canary Wharf. They won't do it, 5 days a week like they used to, but if they do it 3 days rather than 2 days a week, that's good for us because it means more office space is required. And the reason why it's important for us is that 40% of the council's income comes from business rates, and most of that 40% comes from places like Canary Wharf and the restaurants and shops there. Because if they close, not just employment losses to us locally, it's a loss of all of that income. So, for example, one of the things I've really liked the idea of is a floating Lido in the docks where you could actually swim in the docks. That's good for a bunch of reasons in terms of swimming and health and all the rest of it. But it, with a range of other things, it might encourage that person sat at home in Kent, actually, what, I'll go to the office tomorrow because I can have a swim at lunchtime. And I can't do that where I live in Kent. And again, that would be a very good strategic use of the money to make Canary Wharf more attractive, because it will pay for itself. It will save some of that business rates income that we might otherwise lose, as well as improving other areas of Tower Hamlets. So the tourism industry, we need the tourists to come back to us. So we need the investment in Brick Lane and Columbia Road and all of the rest of it to generate jobs and income for us.
Definitely, but also spending on infrastructure to help, say, small independent businesses. Like, I'm thinking out of the box. Like, why don't the council use Section 106 to provide really good broadband? For broadband or wireless everywhere, like high quality, and that will attract all these high tech businesses into the area. And the whole thing will pay for itself. But it's a good way of actually regenerating, say, like dilapidated retail areas, kind of ish, where you encourage these small businesses who don't need these kind of big spaces to operate, and and it's going to generate spend and repurpose our economy in a certain way. But it doesn't seem that kind of thinking is happening. But it's good to know that. So in total, we got, say, £250 million. You're saying? So
I think it's definitely
that's
probably
my
around,
rough calculation.
It's around. I mean, I need to update the numbers. I didn't have time today, but it's probably around £200 million. And then, like, the sort of the housing fund. So a lot of the other rest of our reserves is basically related to housing. So it's sort of buy to let, not buy to let. Sorry, when the council sell properties, so that's generated a lot of money. There's various HRA funds as well, and then there's also asset sales. Whenever we sell buildings, that also generates a lot of cash as well. So in total, our reserves are around the 500 million mark. Not all of that can be spent on anything. There are rules. For example, school reserves. You can't spend school reserves on much else. But some of these pockets, especially new homes bonus, there are no strings attached, and you could spend new homes bonus whatever you wanted to.
Gotcha. And the Section 106 can be repurposed with the developer. You go to the developer and say, we want to spend it on this, and get an agreement from them. As long as they agree, you could do it. So there is that kind of flexibility. So we've come to the end of our program. Andrew, are you going to be live tweeting from the results? Should we be watching out for your Twitter account?
In theory, when you're in the counting centre, you're not supposed to carry your phone around. But I suspect it might be a little bit easier because the referendums, there are fewer rules. But if it was a
Yeah,
normal
got-
election, then you can't just, you know, at the table start tweeting, but you can walk to a corner or something. So yeah, I will tweet tomorrow the results.
Cool. So we'll all be watching out for your live tweeting. It'd be interesting to see. Parts of the borough might be celebrating, other parts might be reflecting, but we'll wait for that announcement. Sort of, it'd be good if you could do a live video. I don't know, and do a bit of commentary.
Well, you can do it from, you know, sort of outside the
Yeah.
secure area,
Yeah,
where the press will be. But yeah.
no problems. So we've come to the end of the program. I just want to thank all our viewers and listeners for tuning in. Thank you for watching the Weekly Politics Show on Relax Radio. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. Enjoy the weekend and thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, bye.